Welcome to the Kingsford Flavor Flash. I'm Coach Van Duzen. This is season 23, episode 4, A Coach's Corner with Jeff Harry. So if you've been around the sports community at all in the Upper Peninsula over the last 30 years, you know Coach Jeff Harry. He coached at Kingsford. He also coached at Iron Mountain before coming back to Kingsford. And both at Kingsford and Iron Mountain, he was part of state championship teams. But before all that, he was also a standout player at Iron Mountain High School and also up at Northern Michigan University. He's been a great mentor of mine, and I was super glad to have this conversation with Coach Harry. All right, well, thanks for coming on, Coach Harry. I really appreciate it.
Well, Coach, thanks for having me. Nice to be on board.
Yeah, so tell us, just go right into when you're a high school football player at that school on the other side of Woodward.
Well, that was my introduction to football. We didn't have youth football back at the time, so we started playing as freshmen. And I was talking to my brother about this a long time ago, and that's where we kind of got bit by the bug that football is a pretty fun game because we both liked physical contact and enjoyed that physicality part of it. But throughout the years over there, we were very successful. I was lucky, played on teams that had very talented players, played for my dad. He was a head coach. And we had a lot of luck, a lot of success over the years in which I played there. We had, during the 80s, Iron Mountain, all athletics in Iron Mountain were very competitive.
So what was it like playing for your dad? Because I've had a couple different players on and some different experiences, but usually pretty fun.
Yeah, John and I both agree. John had more exposure to my dad because John played fullback. My dad was a backs coach, but Coach Wender and Coach Ori were my position coaches. But nonetheless, it's awkward playing for your dad because you're not going to get the compliments that maybe the other kid might get. You don't thrive on that anyway, and you can't. So, yeah, I mean, it was when you go home for dinner, you try to leave football out of it, because now you're just dad. And so, yeah, I mean, it gave me good training. Working with our boys over the years in various sports, kind of trained me for what happens if you have to coach a son. So.
And actually, I just wrote that down because I had Reed Harry on here. Maybe you've heard of him.
He beat me to the punch.
Yeah, he kind of talked about what it was like playing for his dad. So that's really cool and really a family tradition of being on the sidelines.
It is. And it's in our DNA. My dad coached a long time. And we consider ourselves, I guess, a football family, So, yeah. It was interesting.
What else did you do besides football when you're in high school?
Oddly enough, most of us did 3 sports because you didn't have much else to do. It kept you out of trouble. You enjoyed being around each other. So for me, I did football, basketball, and track. I wasn't, extremely talented in any of them, but participating in those, it was just great. You had memorable trips with your friends. We got to play in Hedgecock Fieldhouse. In basketball, our track teams were successful because those guys could run fast. And just the camaraderie of being around your teammates in 3 different sports. And I guess that's something else that kids nowadays seem to miss a little bit. It seems like they all want to be really good at one thing and they play one thing. And, my experience and studies have kind of shown that playing for different coaches, playing different sports with different skill sets really makes a better potential college player because they've seen different coaching styles and they've developed different skills required by each different sport. So it's interesting.
Right. And I always look at, a lot of times those sports complement each other. I think of playing shortstop in baseball is basically the same thing as playing linebacker. You're attacking the ball, going left or right, working downhill. And, a lot of those skills transfer, but I like what you said about working for different coaches and learning different coaching styles, because when you don't have really a choice who your coach is. And, if you want to excel and do do the best you can. You have to be able to conform a little bit to their coaching style.
Yeah, it makes you be a better, well-rounded athlete, learning how to, I guess, coexist with different coaching styles. And one of them might be more salty, one might be a little bit more likely to use sugar, but they were all tremendous, outstanding coaches during my high school career. And I learned so much from them.
And I think also for a high school player, fast forward 5 years, you could replace the word coach with boss, coworker, right? Same type of stuff.
Yep.
So let's move on, because even though you said you weren't that great at any of those sports, you were good enough to go to Northern Michigan University and play football. So tell us about that experience and how high school football prepared you for that, and anything you want about NMU football.
Yeah, that was so similar to playing high school because of the fact we had all those Iron Mountain guys went on and played, and many of them played at Northern Michigan. So guys like Rick Pop, Craig Allen played at Central Michigan, Bobby Mariucci, Bobby Moore, and Bobby Gerhard. We had a lot of Bobs. Mike Bruda I didn't play with in high school, but he became a college teammate. And I mean, that prepped us well because, we learned how to work in high school. And that was something we did really well at Northern Michigan. A lot like Iron Mountain, I was surrounded by really good football players. So, I didn't get to play my first couple of years. I was on scout team and learned how to stand up for yourself because that's a very tough part of moving on to the next level of football. You're not good enough to play when you're 18, especially if you're a lineman. You got to grow, and you're playing with grown men. So you might get a high school kid who went to college and maybe he's not quite mature, 17, 18 years old, and he's playing against guys that are 20, 21, 20. They're a big difference. So we learned how to be tough because some of those guys are intimidating. But I mean, through hard work, discipline, and just sticking with it for 3 years, eventually I got my chance. And you can see the same for a lot of my friends. Some of my friends got chances earlier, some later, but I was a great prep at Iron Mountain, learning how to work so that you could be successful at the next level. And it wasn't because of an abundance of talent, just that you agreed to work hard, pay your dues, listen, keep your mouth shut, and eventually you can go out there and contribute.
We
were lucky that way.
Did you see kids that maybe came from other programs where maybe they had a lot of talent, but they didn't have that work ethic and they struggled?
It's interesting you say that. There were a lot of them, and they wouldn't last because they weren't willing to work. And some of them, they're about going to school in this community. You don't realize how well it does prepare you because we have such great teachers. And a lot of my friends were not prepared for the rigor of football and classroom because, next level football, next level of education is very difficult. And I was lucky because I was able to succeed in the classroom because of my teachers at the high school level. So we learned how to work. Nothing was ever given to you or handed to you. You had to earn it. And our teachers always set the bar high. And we were well prepped. So yeah, some of my teammates were not ready to maybe wait 2 years and grow and work and take their lumps, and or not prepared academically because they didn't make it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I've talked to quite a few flivers that come back from college, and we rarely talk about the classroom portion of it, but it's a huge thing. We always talk about the huge step from high school football to college football, which is astronomical. But then, the same thing goes for the classroom, and depending on what you're going to study, like Millala, a couple episodes back, Cole, he's going to Michigan Tech for business, and that's going to be, next level education. And I like what you said about the teachers in this community. I think both Iron Mountain and Kingsford, rigorously prepare our students well for that.
Yeah, our kids are lucky. They really are. So you get questions all the time in the community, which, I'm concerned about my kids. Where should I throw them to school? I said, throw them to school in Dickinson County and they're going to succeed because it's just kind of been our nature to be really high up as far as, educating kids. And
Yeah,
our
definitely
community
in our
always
culture.
supports it. Yeah.
So once you finished in MU, you went to, was it Oshkosh for a year or
Yep.
two?
Oshkosh North High School.
So what was that like?
And it wasn't one of the brighter points in my, I guess, career, because you're young and dumb. It was very competitive even getting a job in the first place, because there were a lot of people who were going into education. And when I got over there, down there, you don't know what you're doing. I didn't have any friends there. So it was a rough start. And I learned a lot. I didn't have what I would consider a really successful 2-year tenure, and I was looking to come back home. But when I graduated from Northern, I didn't have I knew I kind of wanted to be around the Upper Peninsula. And that, I guess, cemented to me that, all right, you would probably be better back here than down there. So a job came up at Kingsford High School, and I put my name in with the other people, and I was fortunate that I got chosen to come back here.
That's awesome. So go ahead and keep going right from there, because you came here to Kingsford.
Yeah, I came during the early 90s when football was really thriving in both communities. And I worked alongside of awesome coaches. I learned so much from Coach Hofer, Coach Short, Coach Wilsius, Coach Redinger, and all those other Fliver coaches along the way. Coach Bjork, Coach Mills, different coaching styles. I learned so much about what it takes to be effective as a coach. And we had good teams in the early 90s. We went to the state finals one year with Coach Navarra at the quarterback spot and defensive end spot. And then we were runners up that year, I believe. And then we came back in 93 and won our state title. So
Tell us a little bit about that experience, because you guys went undefeated that year. And I think the final score was 35-14 against Imlay City.
With Imlay City, yeah. Those were the golden years. Because over the years you developed a rivalry with these same schools you'd see in the playoffs. And at that time, it was Belding, and they were well coached. Coach Sigler would bring up a contingent from Belding, and we'd play in the dome, and there were some just wars up there. Physical, hard hitting, intense games. And I don't know one year how we beat them, because they were good. They had a bunch of kids who went on to play college football, but Coach Hofer excelled at stopping people on defense. He's creative on offense with our wing tee, and we have really good players. That didn't hurt. So
for sure.
Yeah, that was one of the more memorable things about that experience. It was that rivalry with Belding.
Yeah, Belding, and then Coach Sigler. I know you and I are both kind of fanboys of him, because he went on to Olivet College and installed the wing tee. And, all the naysayers, oh, you can't score points with the wing tee in college. And he went on to be very successful. But one thing
that's inspiring, because he did the unthinkable. They ran an archaic offense at a small college, and no one thought you could win with that.
And he did very well. And one thing I always bring up about the 1993 season, because this is the Fliver Flash, is the Iron Mountain Mountaineers also won a state title that year. And their overall record was 13-1, with their only loss coming to Kingsford. Let's go right into that. What was that Iron Mountain Kingsford rivalry like? And while you were at Kingsford, we'll get back into when you switched, but what was that like in the early 90s?
Yeah, that was the game that the whole community really looked forward to. You had your regular, it was always week 7, I believe, but you had your regular games, and they were all intense, but leading up to that, you could feel it build. Both teams that year were really good, and we're both going in, and all of a sudden we get to a week before and we're both going to be undefeated. And that was the golden years of football, where on a Saturday afternoon, it was always Saturday afternoon, the bitter rivals would clash, and they'd come from all over the UP to watch two very successful programs go at it. And I would say bitter rivals too. When we played back a million years ago, I didn't have a lot of friends that I'd want to hang out with from the opposing school. I didn't really care for much of those guys. In 93, 92, 91, I think there were more friends, but nonetheless, when you took the field, there was no love lost. So, and there were people, at Flivver Field, there'd be 3, 4, 5,000 people. So you have to stand around the perimeter, and yeah, it would have been fun for a player to be a player playing in that game.
Oh, for sure.
Because and that was a great game in 93 when we went at it, because they had a lot of talented kids, and we made basically 1 or 2 more plays in that game that they didn't, and we ended up winning.
Yeah. So then you actually left Kingsford and went to Iron Mountain for a while. Talk to us a little bit about that transition in teaching and coaching.
Yeah, it was a good change for me at the time. I had success with Coach Hofer at the varsity level. I coached 1 year JVs, and then the opportunity came for me to go back to, of course, my alma mater, and it appealed to me, and I went back there, and I had a lot of fun for 7 years. Coached on some very good, successful teams again. In fact, in 96, we repeated what we did in 93 in this community. Iron Mountain and Kingsford both unthinkably went back to the state finals. Both came up on the short end that year. But during those 7 years, I also grew as a coach, because I was asked to coach a couple sports I didn't have a lot of experience and expertise in, but you grow, you learn. And it was great 7 years. And in that 7 years, we won a state title in 2000. So good experience, good relationships. Those are some of the finest years. It's when you're in your kind of the midstream of your teaching and coaching career, and you kind of figured things out.
Well, and was it just a few months ago you had a reunion for that 2000 team?
Yeah, that was fun. They put together a nice little setup at City Park, and I got to see some of those kids that I hadn't seen probably since they graduated, some of them. But they're the same. They were raised right in this community, well educated, and all those kids are successful in life.
Well, I think for me doing this podcast, that's one of the best parts is you coach a kid. I'm getting to the point now where I had them in the classroom, and then I get to coach them, and then they go off into the world and do things, and then come back. And to have those conversations is just really special.
They are. Have you had any of your former players' offspring in class?
I have not. If I would have stayed at once, I would have.
Okay, that's when you've reached the threshold. Okay, I'm getting a little older, but no, I'm experienced. That's how we say that.
Seasoned.
Right.
Yeah. So then after 7 years at that school on the other side of Woodward, you came back to Kingsford. So
yeah, it was an interesting thing. I was teaching math at Iron Mountain, and they had just gotten into the spreadsheets and computers, and there was no internet. But there was this really cool thing called video editing, and I got bit by the bug, and we had it kind of as a club. Didn't have a class, but holy man, this is fun. And lo and behold, the class became available at Kingsford High School to teach it. I'm like, I sure would like to do that and coaching with those guys again. So I got lucky. They hired me, and that's where I stayed from whenever that was, 7 plus 02. So yeah, it was a good stretch from 03 to 21 back at Brighting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. I loved the teaching part of it, especially, and then the coaching was always fun regardless.
So did you always teach in the middle school, or were you at the high school for the video editing?
A little bit of both. I had high school video editing, but then they came over to the middle school for that class. We had those ginormous Macintosh computers. So yeah, it was fun. I had a little bit of both, high school kids, and then every age at middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th, throughout the years. Good mix.
Awesome. So you came back coaching again with Coach Hofer, or were you sub-varsity at that time? What did you come back to?
A little bit of everything. Did some JVs, did a little varsity, did some frosh. So yeah, I mean, it was a good little mix in there, you know, get to be an assistant or you can be a head coach. I did that with the freshmen for a number of years. So yeah, I mean, it
That's
was
fun.
a
And
really good mix.
I know for those that were listening to the podcast last year, you were an volunteer assistant, no responsibilities whatsoever for the Fliver junior varsity team. And really mentoring me and Coach Olson. So thank you in advance for that.
Oh, that was fun for me to, when you can do that and build relationship with kids, that's the most fun, as you know, from teaching and coaching is the relationships with those kids. And then when you don't have those anymore, sometimes you miss them a little bit. So it's nice to be able to come back and develop those and work with good guys like you and Wally and Olson, and
For
a lot of
sure.
fun. Yep.
So you mentioned it earlier. We're going to go back to it. And that's, you told us a little bit about being the player playing for your dad. And then you had your boys come through the program as players, and now you're the coach. So talk to us a little bit about that, and maybe something you learned from your dad or something you learned along the way, and how that came through your eyes.
Yeah, biggest thing was you cannot show any favoritism. So at best, you're being more critical of them than anybody, and you're very sparing on your praise. And then that's not fair to the kid, but if you don't, that's going to even worse for the kid because their dad favorite is showing favoritism towards them, and I didn't want that. That'd be worse than anything. So, but it was yeah, it was a good experience. I tried to do what my dad did, keep football at football, and when you come home, try not to talk about it. They probably don't want to. So yeah, it was good preparation.
Yeah, and
Playing
that's
for my dad.
talking with a bunch of people that is a very common theme, in that the dad cannot show any favoritism towards the kid, even if their kid is the best player, right? Even if their kid is the best kid on the field, the dad part always kind of sneaks into conversations, I'm sure, at the for all the experts who are Saturday morning quarterbacking, if you will.
Yeah, there's no question. It's not fun being the coach's kid.
Sure.
It's okay being the kid's dad because you're trying hard not to, but you don't know. I knew as a kid being on the other end of it, like I didn't want praise anyway because I knew what your friends would think. So, and it put a great deal of pressure on. I remember I felt that as a player playing for my dad, I'm like, you can't be rotten. You got to be, I always felt like you got to be the strongest guy, the quickest guy, the hardest worker, boom, 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 boom. So it was good prep that way. You can't be lazy being a coach's kid.
Oh,
You got to
sure.
be the other end of that.
So usually the last question I ask is any advice you have for any young flivers coming through the program, either 8th graders or 9th graders. But I'm going to save that one till the end. I got one question before that, and that's just leveraging your coaching experience. What advice do you have for young coaches? I still consider myself a young coach, regardless of my age, but coaches maybe just getting into coaching or just in a couple of years, what's some advice you have for them? And it might transpire all sports, because coaching is something I've learned.
Right. I would coach as many sports as I could, whether you're good at coaching them, whether you played them or not, because that's where you really learn how to teach. If you haven't coached basketball and you pick up a 7th grade team, you learn so much more. It's like playing sports in high school. High school, you play lots to learn different coaching styles. Well, when you get into coaching, coach a lot so you can learn different player styles and learn from other great coaches. That's the other piece of advice I'd give. Latch on with someone who works hard and learn from them, because that is so valuable to any young coach. Coach lots of different sports under a lot of different coaches, and then learn from them. You're not an expert. My dad told me it's going to take you 5 years to make a good teacher anyway. He was right. It takes a long time.
Yeah.
It took a lot longer than that before you reach where you feel you're good at it. but you're less bad at 5 years than you were at 1 year. I know that.
Less bad. I like that.
Yeah.
And I remember coming in, coaching first when I was student teaching a middle school team. I knew less than zero things, and it showed. But then moving up to Lance and starting to coach right away, and I coached with Jerry Bugney.
I was going to say you had a great coach
yes.
working,
Yep,
above
just
you.
incredible knowledge base, and then working with Coach Leaf was a great experience. And especially as a super young coach, he gave me a lot of leeway in coaching the offensive line and defensive line, and calling the defense probably way before I was ready to. But I learned so much. I like what you said there. In the first 5 years, I was a lot less bad.
Yeah.
than I was.
And then doing something you haven't done, you're forced to learn on the job, and
yep.
And continue getting better. That's the other thing you'd want to bring up. Continue getting better. Back in the day, remember, you could go to a clinic, and so those are essential, I think. Attending professional development,
Yeah. So what about for that young flivver coming through the system? Maybe they're sitting in my history class as an 8th grader, or maybe they're a 9th grader. Maybe they got a year of freshman football under their belt. What kind of advice do you have for them to be successful, not just on the field, but as they move through their high school career and on to other things?
You sound generic, but there's no substitute for hard work, because you may not be talented as the next guy, but if you all work them, you can succeed. And that's football, basketball, baseball, track, any of that stuff. Hard work trumps talent. When talent doesn't work hard, it's an old kind of a cliche, but it's so true. And then play different sports so that you become a more well-rounded athlete, like we talked about before, playing with different coaching styles. And I guess the biggest lesson I ever learned about any sport was probably what I learned in football, because we were so good as a team, and I always consider myself I wasn't like as talented as that guy over there, so I never wanted to let my teammates down. So I would work ridiculously hard to be as good as I could be, because the fear of letting a teammate down. That's a life skill. You don't want to let your boss down now that you're a grown man, and you don't want to let your family down. You don't want to let people in your community down. It's a great life skill for a young kid to learn how to work hard so that you don't let your teammates down. Never let a teammate down. That was one of the most valuable lessons that I've taken into adulthood.
Yeah, I like that. And I've said before, play for the name on the front of your jersey, not the name on your back. And I'm not sure it was as much of a struggle, but I think with the social media we have now, am I getting a great Instagram picture with my eye black on and those types of things? Like, what's the most important thing? And it sounds like the most important thing is don't let a teammate down. Work hard enough that teammate can never look at you and say, you didn't do enough.
Absolutely. I mean, if it drives a kid to be, I remember we had a kid who missed weightlifting. He never missed, but that day overslept, came to weightlifting late with tears in his eyes. That kid's going to be a success because he knew he let his teammates down. I'm like, all right, I don't have to say anything to that kid.
Yep. That's awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation, and I want to thank you for coming on, and we will talk to you soon.
Good stuff, Coach. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. And as always, I ask that you go down in the show notes. Make sure you're following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Also, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever you listen to the Kingsford Flivver Flash. Till next time, this is Coach Van Dusen. Win in the classroom, win in the community, and win on the field.